You felt the sticky dampness rising from the sandy ground as your bare feet sank lightly into the cold sand. The wind whispered among the twisted trees, carrying the salty scent of the sea mingled with the mustiness of stranded timbers. In the distance, the constant and monotonous sound of waves breaking against the wrecked ship brought a heavy sense of isolation pressing upon your chest. You knew each step you took was marked only by silence, broken solely by the faint crackling of dry branches beneath your feet, and the bitter memory of those forgotten stories dragging like the mist that cloaked the woods. Preparing to spend the night here meant embracing the cold that seeped into your bones, the creak of ancient planks weighed down by years, and an invisible presence as palpable as the earth's damp smell. The pale blue of dawn stretched over the island, like a faded film, cold and distant. Your breath hung in the sharp air, trembling like the hesitant flicker of a candle almost lost. The crooked trees cast thin shadows on the cracked sand, and the occasional rustle of leaves seemed louder than it should in this stillness. You noticed the salt clinging to your lips, and the faint, acrid taste of old smoke from nearby burnt wood, mixing with the sea's persistent scent. The coarse fabric of your worn jacket rubbed against your skin, rough and familiar, anchoring you to this place despite the chill. If today a simple no signal would send you spiraling, imagine the slow dread of seeing your last dry stick dissolve into ash, knowing no rescue would come. You stooped to gather more splintered wood, your fingers tracing each jagged edge with careful movements, hesitant to disturb the quiet more than necessary. The process itself became a ritual, a dance of patience and minute observations. You tapped a fragment against another, the dull clink echoing softly, nearly swallowed by the wind's sigh. Your makeshift shelter took form slowly beneath the skeletal branches, each twig positioned to trap warmth, to keep the oppressive cold at bay a while longer. Flickering shadows painted shifting patterns on the walls of your refuge as you coaxed the fragile flame to life. The warmth seeped into your trembling hands, a subtle promise amid the night's unyielding stillness. For a heartbeat, you traced a line in the sand, noting how the ocean's rhythm seemed to pulse in time with your slowed breathing. Then, as the night deepened, an almost imperceptible movement caught the corner of your eye, a ripple among the twisted roots beyond the firelight. The air shifted suddenly, thicker, carrying a faint chorus of whispers that did not belong to the wind or the waves. The trees seemed to lean closer, their crooked fingers entwined with the dark. A collective breath seemed held, stretched thin, like the fragile lace of fog settling on your skin. The isolation around you tightened its grip, no longer simply the absence of sound, but an unseen gaze, heavy and watching. Before Morpheus claims you for good, check quickly if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the next bedtime stories. Take a moment and leave a like as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this little haven of calm alive. Thanks for being a part of it. You remain seated by the flickering fire, its fragile glow barely pushing back the encroaching shadows that clung to the silent woods. The warmth spread slowly, a delicate veil over your chilled skin, but around you, the cold crept like a whispered secret threading through the gnarled branches. Every breath you drew was heavy with the salt tang of the sea, mingled now with a faint, acrid smell that tugged at the edge of your senses. Burnt timber, smoldering but not dead. You glanced toward the scattered remains of what once had been a proud ship, now just splintered bones, resting in quiet surrender. The wind shifted, carrying with it the eerie cadence of the waves, a constant, lulling pulse that matched the slow rhythm of your heartbeat. Each snap of a twig beneath your trembling fingers sent a chain of alertness through you. You hesitated before reaching out again, feeling the coarse bark of a fallen branch rough against your skin. The motion was deliberate, nearly sacred in its care. No sudden movements, no careless noises. The surrounding forest seemed to breathe with you, inhaling deeply, exhaling barely audible sighs that rustled the cracked leaves. You traced the contours of the shelter once more, noticing how the brittle twigs overlapped, interlocking in a web meant as much for comfort as protection. The pungent scent of damp earth rose from beneath your knees as you shifted, grounding you in this fragile moment of isolation. Above, the branches arced like skeletal arms, blotting out the sky, yet allowing the occasional star to flicker uncertainly through narrow gaps. Their distant twinkle offered a fragile promise, a quiet reminder that you were not entirely swallowed by the night. The fire's fragile heartbeat kept time with your own. You reached toward it with both hands, feeling the gentle heat seep through your frozen skin. The light threw long, shivering shadows on the sand, where every grain seemed etched with memories, silent stories buried beneath the surface. Your mind sought something steady, something to grasp in the relentless silence. You found it in the slow motion of the fire's breath, the flicker and pause, rise and fall. It was a quiet dance, hypnotic in its simplicity, a refuge from the creeping dread. Outside your small sanctuary, the world held its breath. The sound of the ocean crashed endlessly, waves breaking against jagged rocks with a dull, repetitive roar. Somewhere beyond the dark canopy, you believed a gull cried, sharp and fleeting, cutting through the muted chorus of the island's night. The salt air carried a chill that crept beneath your frayed jacket, tugging at your skin like invisible fingers. Your eyes scanned the shadowed forest edge, lingering on the twisted roots and gnarled trunks that seemed to shift under the weight of unseen things. A subtle movement caught the corner of your sight, A flutter, a dip among the underbrush. You froze, breath caught, heart tightening in a slow clamp. The dark beyond your firelight felt suddenly heavier, thicker, as if the woods themselves leaned in closer to observe. The faint chorus of whispers rose again, indistinct words tangled in the sigh of leaves and the cadence of waves. You could not tell if it was memory, illusion, or something waking from the earth. Your fingers brushed a dry leaf, crisp and brittle between them, grounding you once more in the tangible. You forced yourself to inhale slowly, drawing the night air deep into your lungs, tasting the mingled salt and smoke, the damp earth rising beneath your movement. Your eyes trace the lines of your shelter, again the fragile barrier between you and the silent dark beyond. You repeating the motion of gathering small twigs, careful, methodical. Each action a lifeline, an anchor in the growing stillness. The dry wood chipped softly beneath your nails as you arrange the fragments, building a quiet fortress of warmth and light that stood defiant against the surrounding gloom. Time seemed to melt. The cool night pressed in from all sides, still and endless, your breath caught in frequent puffs, visible as tiny clouds, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. The fire crackled low, a restless, hissing murmur, while the trees swayed in the distance, their branches scratching at the sky like restless fingers stretching in the dark. The weight of solitude deepened, folding over you like thick fog. You could almost feel the forest watching, waiting in patient silence as seconds stretched into minutes. The faint glimmer of dawn began to tease the edges of the horizon, a soft wash of pale blue bleeding slowly into the firmament's black canvas. You pulled your jacket tighter, the rough fabric scraping gently against your skin. The sounds softened, a lull in the ocean's roar, the distant shiver of leaves. Your eyes closed briefly, surrendering to the slow exhaustion blooming deep in your limbs. The rhythmic pulse of the waves settled within you like a heartbeat matching your own, steady and unyielding. Yet, just as you felt the weight of the night begin to release its grip, a sharp, unnatural silence fell. The whispering wind ceased abruptly. The usual chorus of nocturnal creatures quieted, as if paused mid-song. You opened your eyes wide, breath trembling in the crisp air. From the corner of the shelter, just beyond the fire's weakening glow, a shadow moved, impossible to place or define. It was darker than the night, more still than the trees, and it lingered there, watching. The leaves seemed to halt their rustle. The ocean held its next breath. You knew then, before curiosity threatened to pull you forward, that the unseen gaze was no longer only waiting. It was deciding. You held your breath as the shadow lingered just beyond the shrinking circle of firelight, deeper than the night itself, solid and unmoving. Your fingers pressed tightly against the coarse fabric of your jacket, tracing the frayed edge as the cold seeped more insistently now, no longer just outside, but threading into your very bones. The acrid taste of smoke hung heavier, curling like a slow-burning coil in your throat. Somewhere nearby, a wave's dull crash seemed to quiet, leaving only the rough whisper of wind sliding through the skeletal branches above you. You dared not shift, lest the faintest sigh or scrape betray your presence. The soft crackle of flames became an anchor, steady and rhythmic, the flame's gentle dance, a fragile heart against the pressing dark. Your eyes narrowed, trying to carve out the shape from the indistinct blackness, but the forest held its secrets close, twisting shapes into shadows, and shadows into deeper doubt. The trees, those crooked sentinels, swayed slowly, their branches scratching the sky like dull claws in a silent rhythm. Time became a slow drip. Your breath came out in tight, white clouds, vanishing nearly as soon as they formed. The salt-laden air was thick, almost metallic between your lips. You reached hesitantly for a twig, dry and brittle as old bones, the texture rough against your fingertips. Each small movement was deliberate, thought through. Gather, arrange, ignite. The fire flickered with a sudden flare as you coaxed it with a breath, the glow pushing back the dark just enough to touch the edges of your shelter in a warm embrace, a steady pulse. Beat in your ears, the mix of ocean waves and your own heartbeat blending until you could no longer tell one from the other. The chill of the night wrapped around your shoulders like a threadbare cloak, the coarse fibers of your jacket scraping subtly against raw skin. You felt the roughness as a reminder. This place was unforgiving, and you were not yet safe. The salty breeze carried a faint, smoky whisper, something unsettled beneath the calm surface of the island's breath. The flickering flames painted trembling shadows on the sea. With you, the night was a fragile thing, balanced on the thin edge between quiet and something watching, waiting. A sudden shift came from your peripheral vision, a subtle sway among the roots tangled nearby, a slow ripple like a sigh released into the cool air. Your muscles tensed, your skin prickling under the weight of unseen attention. The trees seemed to lean forward ever so slightly, their twisted limbs knitting together in a shroud that tightened like a whispered secret. Whispers rose again, barely audible, hushed voices that could have been the wind, the sea, or the ghosts folded into the ground itself. Your hands paused mid-motion, fingers curling around splintered wood, the texture sharp and dry. You took a slow, deep breath, tasting salt and smoke and the bitter bite of earth beneath your nails. The faint crackle of the fire chimed softly a slow, deliberate beat that tethered you to this fragile moment. Inhaling again, you let the scent of burnt timber and damp sea air fill you, anchoring your scattered senses. You shifted slightly, the shelter's brittle silhouette catching the dim light and casting fractured patterns on your face. The branches above arched higher, like hollow ribs of something ancient, and stars slipped in and out behind their grasp. Their distant light was cold and steady, a fragile netting of hope thrown over the night's dark weight. The salt clung to your lips, the taste sharp and grounding. You gathered another piece of wood, careful to keep the movements smooth and slow, tracing the lines of the shelter as if memorizing its fragile form. Every stick was placed with quiet reverence, a shield not just from cold, but from the deeper, more insistent isolation pressing in. The crackling fire was your lone companion, its hesitant warmth seeping into your skin, threading through the cold until it felt almost like breath. Minutes stretched and folded into themselves. The ocean sounded endless, waves grinding against unseen rocks with a dull, endless roar, steady, relentless. From somewhere far off, a gull cried, high and fleeting, before melting back into the silence. The forest's watchful eyes seemed to hold you, a heavy gaze that pressed like velvet, unyielding and patient. You sank a little deeper into the sand, the grains cool and firm beneath you. The chill gnawed at your limbs, but the fire kept a small island of warmth alive, a quiet rebellion against the creeping dark. Your breath fell into a slow rhythm, pulses threading along the edges of exhaustion. The shadows danced, long and restless, casting half-seen shapes that flickered at the borders of your vision. Then, just as your limbs ached to drift, your mind curling toward sleep, a new sound ruffled the stillness. A faint, deliberate step, soft against the cracked sand. The forest seemed to hold its breath again, every leaf still, every wave paused mid-roll. You felt the shift before you saw it, a presence shifting closer, quieter than any breeze, more deliberate than the night itself. Your heart caught in your throat as the shadow moved, emerging slowly from the thickest blackness, shape uncertain, the outline bending like smoke caught in moonlight. The unseen watcher was no longer content to linger just beyond. It stepped closer, each step a promise of a story yet untold. The air tightened around you, thick with expectation and the faintest shimmer of something beyond understanding. And there, just as the fire flickered low, the forest swallowed the shape whole, leaving you alone again, but forever changed. The shadow lingered beyond the dying firelight, a shape formed from the thickest folds of night, unseen but deeply felt. You sat motionless, the rough fibers of your jacket biting gently against your skin as the cold crept upward, threading slowly through your bones. The acrid curl of smoke lingered heavily in your throat, twisting with the salt and damp earth that clung to the air around you. Somewhere beyond the fringe of your fragile shelter, The faint roar of restless waves slowed, softened, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Your hands hovered, trembling, near the scattered twigs you'd gathered, not daring to stir, for even the smallest shift might dissolve the fragile peace you held with the darkness. The fire flickered once, then twice, casting long, quivering shadows that stretched and contracted like silent creatures, dancing just beyond reach. Above, the skeletal branches quivered in the reluctant wind, their curled fingers reaching into the night sky, scratching at the stars that flickered faintly, uncertain and distant. Slowly, you inched forward, every movement deliberate and careful. The texture of cold sand pressed lightly beneath your knees, grains stubborn and sharp against your skin. You reached out, fingers closing around a brittle stick, rough and dry, a familiar weight that grounded you against the swirling unknown. The fire snapped softly as a breath coaxed it alive for a heartbeat longer, the gentle warmth folding back around you like a fragile shield. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer, breathing deep and slow. The whispering branches tangled in an eerie rhythm, their murmurs threading through the salt-laden wind. You could almost hear the delicate voices beneath those sighs, a tangled chorus of memories, half-forgotten stories folded into the earth where the shattered ship rested in quiet surrender. The night weighed heavy, a presence pressing in like cold velvet, yet your breath remained steady, slow, and tethered to the pulse of the fire's quiet dance. Your eyes swept the fragile outline of the shelter once more, noting how the brittle twigs interlocked like veins, a network crafted not just for protection, but for comfort, a boundary against the encroaching dark. The scent of damp wood, burnt just barely beyond the sparks, rose slowly through the air, mingled with the sharp tang of salt and smoke. It was a scent both grounding and uneasy, anchored in the earth, but reaching upward to something unseen. A sudden, subtle movement twisted through your peripheral sight, a hesitation, a ripple through the tangling roots and dry leaves. Your heart tightened, slow and deliberate, catching in your throat. The shadow seemed to shift in response, a presence folding closer into your small circle of firelight, almost merging with the trembling darkness. The faint chorus of whispers rose again, the indistinct syllables tangled in the sighing wind and the sway of branches overhead. You forced yourself to breathe deeply, tasting salt and smoke, the dry grit of sand beneath your fingernails, grounding you to this fragile moment. The fire crackled low, a slow and steady rhythm that anchored your scattered senses, even as the unseen gaze tightened around you like a coil. Your hands moved methodically, gathering tiny fragments of wood, arranging them with reverent care. Each small piece placed was a quiet defiance, a heartbeat of light cutting through the creeping cold. The night stretched endlessly. Your breath came in small clouds, vanishing almost as soon as they appeared. The fire's glow flickered uncertainly, casting long, trembling shadows that danced over the sand, where every grain seemed to hold a secret buried beneath years of silence. The far-off murmur of waves rolled in steady pulses, a dull, persistent roar that melded seamlessly with the slow drum of your own heartbeat. From some distant corner of the restless island, a gull's sharp call sliced briefly through the muted chorus, a fleeting sound that faded back into the heavy quiet. The brittle branches above scratched softly at the sky, a restless murmur threading through the night air, the forest's breath moving around you like a curtain drawn tight. You pulled your jacket tighter, the rough fabric rasping against your chilled skin, a faint warmth lingering like a promise that this place, though cold and watching, still offered shelter for those who dared to seek it. Time folded around you, each moment stretching wide and slow. Your limbs ached with exhaustion, every muscle heavy and slow to obey. The night had become a slow, deliberate flow, each breath, each heartbeat, a steady step forward into the unknown. The shadows moved with you, shifting just beyond comprehension, the trees whispering in tangled voices that blurred the line between memory and now, and then, just as the fire began to falter, dying back into a thin coil of smoke and light, a new sound broke through, the faintest footstep, soft against the cracked and weathered sand. It came from the dark, deliberate and cautious, breaking the fragile silence with a whisper of presence. The forest held itself still once more, leaves frozen in mid-rustle, the ocean stilled mid-foam. You fixed your gaze on the edge of the firelight, heart pounding, slow and steady, fingers clutching the rough wood like a lifeline. The shadow stepped forward, peeling away from the night like a breath escaping the throat, its shape bending and shifting, neither fully there nor gone. The watcher was no longer content to observe from the edges. It moved closer, deliberate and quiet, as if carrying a story too heavy to tell aloud. You breathed in the salt and smoke one last time before the darkness swallowed the shape whole, leaving you alone once more, but forever changed, your world rattled by the weight of what watched from within the night. You remained still as the fire dwindled into a fragile coil of light and ash, the warmth retreating with cautious reluctance. The shadow that had stepped closer lingered just beyond the trembling circle of glow, an indiscernible shape wrapped in the dense fabric of night. Your breath caught in your chest, shallow and slow, as the cold seeped deeper beneath your jacket, threading chill through muscle and bone until it settled like a quiet weight inside you. The scent of smoke hung thick and heavy, a lingering echo of burnt timber, woven with the sharp salt of the sea and the damp musk of earth. Somewhere, a wave slid against rocks with a muffled rumble, as if hushed by the patience of waiting. Your fingers tightened around a broken twig, its rough surface a familiar anchor in a world poised on the edge of shadow. You didn't dare look away, eyes fixed on the darkness where the shape hovered, blurred and nearly swallowed whole by the night. The forest's crooked arms seemed to lean closer, as if drawn by a silent summons, leaves brushing faintly against one another in a slow, whispering rhythm. The palms of your hands, warmed moments before, were now numb, and you pressed them to your cheeks, willing the blood to return to your skin. The fire flickered and faltered again, breathing a feeble surge before settling into silence. The shadows lengthened, shadows within. Shadows, growing thick and restless, your ears tuned to every ripple of the night, the stone's slow contraction as it cooled, the hushed shift of sand grains sliding under weightless feet, the distant cry of a solitary gull broken sharp against the sky's cold expanse. You drew your knees closer, feeling the coarse grit of sand pressing through your threadbare clothing, tracing stubborn patterns beneath your worn skin. A breath passed through the trees, low and tentative, carrying a scent so faint you almost questioned it. Something earthy and faintly metallic, like old blood hidden beneath soil. Your throat tightened, dry and raw, as the slow pulse of the night quickened imperceptibly. The shadows pulsed with depth, as if the darkness itself breathed, expanding and contracting in quiet sync with your rapid heartbeat. Outside your fragile refuge, the forest no longer simply watched. It moved. Your limbs trembled subtly, the ache of cold pressing at every joint. You shifted a fraction, careful not to disturb the stillness, and your fingertips brushed a smooth stone settled near the base of your shelter. Its cool surface grounded you, a silent companion amid the whispering dark. The fire's glow coaxed delicate spins of smoke, tracing ribbons that rose and curled toward the invisible canopy above. They dissolved gently into the night, vanishing like the fragile hope resting in your chest. Gradually, you allowed your gaze to roam the fragile perimeter of your shelter. The twigs, brittle and spindly, formed a delicate latticework, an imperfect promise of safety against the unknown. The space between each twig quivered faintly in the faint breeze, carrying whispers that tangled with the rolling ocean's ceaseless song. The scent of salt and damp earth infused every breath you took, mingling with the subtle bitterness of ash that clung quietly to the air. Beyond the fire's reach, deeper against the thick tangle of roots and leaves, the shifting dark kept its secrets close. A faint glimmer, just at the edge of sight, bent and pulsed, an impossible flicker that didn't belong to stars. It moved thin and fluid, a shadow folding into itself before stretching out as if awakening from a long slumber beneath the ground. The forest's breath caught with it, a collective silence hanging like a fragile thread. You inhaled slowly, tasting the bitter salt and smoke on your tongue, grounding yourself in this fragile balance. Your hands resumed their slow, methodical task, gathering fragments of dry wood, each piece a sharp-edged whisper pressed between your fingers. The fire accepted the offering with a soft, appreciative hiss and a gentle flare that danced light along nearby twigs. The fragile warmth spread once more, curling around your trembling hands, offering a quiet defiance to the cold pressing in from all sides. Minutes passed with the weight of stillness. The waves whispered relentlessly against the shore, merging from shape to shape, searching for the outline that had moved closer. It was there, just beyond the reach of warmth, watching, patient and heavy with unspoken intent. The forest seemed to hold its breath, leaves frozen in mid-rustle, every wave pausing in a poised hush. The air thickened, laden with the faintest vibrations, like a chorus held just beneath hearing. And then, from the depths beyond your fragile circle, a soft sound emerged, not sharp or sudden, but deliberate and faint, like a slow exhale pressed against the sand. The shadow shifted once more, folding forward to reveal a featureless silhouette, its edges blurred and whispering away into the dark. You felt the weight of eyes, ancient and quiet, settling on you like a winter's slow fog. You held your breath, every nerve trembling with the unspoken question. Hanging in the air, what story would the darkness tell next? The shadow lingered just beyond the flickering edge of the firelight, a dense stain on the night's quiet canvas. You held your breath, every muscle taut, feeling the cold needle its way deeper into your skin, threading through the worn fabric of your jacket and crawling beneath the brittle hair of your arms. The acrid smoke tangled in your throat, heavy and stubborn, while the faint pulse of waves pressed a steady rhythm against the shore, a relentless hum underscoring the silence. Your fingers curled tighter around the rough twig, its splintered surface both a comfort and a reminder of the fragility protecting you. Motion felt dangerous, as if the smallest breath, the slightest shift, might dissolve this tenuous boundary between safety and the unknown. You traced the uneven texture of the bark, the jagged edges biting softly into your flesh. The fire's warmth was now a threadbare promise, fragile, flickering, but still enough to tether you to the moment. Above, the skeletal branches bent and twisted, scratching at the dark sky like delicate claws. They shivered in the reluctant breeze, carrying with them the dry scent of burnt wood and the faint salt tang that filled the air. Somewhere beyond, the wrecked ship rested silently, a ghostly carcass, dragging memories like a veil across the island's breadth. The shadow shifted, folding in and out of itself, thin and fluid. You sensed patience there, a slow but deliberate intent, as if it waited not simply to watch, but to whisper an unwelcome story, etched deep in the island's bones. The weight of unseen eyes settled like a shroud, pressing softly against your skin. With a slow inhale, you tasted the briny mixture of sea and smoke, grounding yourself. Air filled your lungs, sharp and cold, brushing the back of your throat as you returned to the rhythm of the fire's fragile dance. The trembling shadows crept along the sand, each grain catching the dull glow like a muted ember. Your hands repeated their quiet motion, gathering, arranging, coaxing, each small piece building a fragile sanctuary against the encroaching dark. Around you, the forest breathed low and deep. The tangled roots curled beneath gnarled trunks, murmuring with the soft brush of leaves. Whispers rose again in indecipherable tones, threading through the sigh of branches and the distant roar of surf. The night stretched thickly, an ocean of black, pressing around the brittle lattice of your shelter. Yet beneath the weight, you found stillness, a sanctuary carved from quiet breaths and the slow pulse of survival. Time was a drifting haze, minutes folding into themselves like waves folding over sand. Your breath came slow, a steady plume dissolving into the cold air. The fire settled into a low murmur, a timid flicker resisting the night's hunger. Your raw fingertips traced the dry wood again, the rough edges like a whisper echoing beneath your skin. The shelter held its fragile shape, a thin wall of twigs and hope. Far off, a gull called, sharp and sudden, breaking the shroud momentarily before the silence reclaimed its reign. The ocean's voice dropped to a murmur, the endless cycle of wave on rock fading to a distant murmur under the darkened sky. Your eyes scanned the boundary of your refuge, catching every shiver of movement, every flicker in the dark beyond the fire's reach. There, at the edge of sight, the shadow breathed again, shifting slowly forward. It was neither solid nor absent, but a wraith pressed into the blackness, eyes unseen yet felt, an ancient patience etched into something beyond human knowing. The air thickened, a slow heaviness settling like wet cloth over your shoulders, tightening with each deliberate step it took. You hunched lower, drawing your knees close, the crease of sand cold and unforgiving against your skin. Your heart beat slow and stubborn, a quiet drum holding you steady against the creeping weight of the night's gaze. A faint breeze carried the scent of damp earth and burnt ash, weaving through your hair and curling softly around your neck. The island's breath, lingering and watchful. Fingers trembling, you lifted another splintered stick, placing it gently amid the dry kindling. The fire licked at the fuel with a quiet hunger, rising briefly, then sighing back into a fragile glow. Warmth spread delicately across your palms, a single thread woven through the chill. The dance of light and shadow played against your shelter, shadows flickering with delayed echoes, stirring memories buried beneath layers of salt and smoke. The forest held its breath, every leaf still, every branch poised against the sky's blind stare. The ocean murmured a timeless lullaby, a thread threading through your veins, matching your breath's slow cadence. The night's silence settled deep, a heavy velvet drape suffusing every corner of the island. And then, the faintest sound brushed the edge of your awareness, soft, deliberate, like a slow exhale pressed into the sand. The shadow stirred, folding into itself before unfurling anew, a shape both there and not, whispering secrets just beyond hearing. You stared, frozen beneath its gaze, feeling the thick pulse of something old and knowing. In that moment, the air shifted, the quiet deepened, and you realized that what had come close was not merely a watchful presence, but a herald of truths yet to be spoken, waiting to unravel the fragile barrier you had so carefully built. The night wrapped tighter still, and the shadow began to move, sliding closer, dissolving the last edge of firelight. The island held its breath, and so did you. You remained motionless, the fragile thread of firelight shrinking between your trembling hands and the cold shadows. The breath of the island pressed close around you, dense, patient, like a thick cloth woven from unseen eyes and whispered secrets. Your fingers gripped the dry twig tighter, its rough surface a single truth beneath the shifting illusions. Outside your slender wall of brittle branches, the dark seemed to hold its own weight, heavier than air, folding in around your small sanctuary. The scent of smoke lingered, sharp and musky, threading through the salt air and damp earth scent that wrapped your skin like an old, tired blanket. Somewhere far beyond the reach of your flickering flame, the relentless rhythm of waves softened, paused in a breathless hush, as if the sea itself awaited what was to come. Leaves above rustled faintly, trembling as though reluctant to disturb the fragile balance. The night held its breath with you. Your eyes strained to pierce the shadow that lurked just outside, a shape as fluid and fleeting as smoke caught in the cusp of a slow sigh. The shadow did not move swiftly, but settled deliberately, folding into itself, then stretching outward like seaweed stirred by a gentlest current. It carried a patience that pressed against your chest, a weight that did not demand action, but whispered in slow pulses, a silent summons aching just beneath your skin. Fingers wrapped around the twig shifted once, placing it carefully on the growing pile beside you. A slow, reverent gesture. The fire accepted the gift with a gentle flare, the light pressing back the dark with its timid glow. The warmth bloomed like a whispered promise along your fingertips, curling softly through the chill that had settled deep inside. Each breath you took hung heavy with the brine of sea and the bitter sting of smoke, mingling in the cold air as you felt the fragile warmth encircle you like a shield. The skeletons of trees arched overhead, their gnarled fingers reaching into the ink-black sky. Between the branches, faint stars blinked uncertainly, hesitant sentinels in the vast silence. Their dim light scattered, broken by shadow and memory, as the forest seemed to lean closer, its breath a slow, tangled murmur threading through the salt, wet air. You felt the weight of the island's watchful eyes, ancient and steady, pressing in upon your nerves like a slow tide. Your gaze fell back to the fire, tracing the slow dance of flame and ash. The crackling whispered a fragile rhythm, a heartbeat that tethered you to this tenuous moment. Between day and night, light and shadow, the sand beneath your knees was cool and firm, granular against your skin, each grain holding a story, folded beneath years untouched by time. You let your fingers draw small circles in the dust, an anchor in the swirling uncertainty. The darkness beyond your shelter seemed to pulse softly, a living breath deeper than silence. Movement stirred in the thicket, slow and deliberate, a ripple through twisted roots and dry leaves, as if the earth itself exhaled. Your muscles coiled, heart beating a stolid drum that echoed with the ocean's distant roar. The world narrowed to the space between your breath and the shadow, the thinnest line between safety and something waiting. Despite the chill pressing against your skin, a faint pulse of warmth lingered from the fire. A fragile flame fought for life amid the creeping cold. It mirrored your own slow, steady breath, hushing the edge of fear with each flicker and pause. The acrid tang of ash mixed with the salt spray on your lips, grounding you in the sensory web of sea, smoke, and earth. Your hands moved with a careful ritual, gathering brittle wood with slow, deliberate motions, each piece placed among the others like a whispered prayer. The fire responded with a gentle hiss, the glow rising once more to chase away the deeper shadows, pressing just beyond the fragile perimeter. You could almost feel the fragile circle of warmth pulse with your heartbeat, fragile and defiant beneath the weight of night. Above, the branches shifted, scratching softly at the sky in hesitant rhythms. Leaves murmured faint secrets, carried on the salt-laden breeze, voices indistinct yet persistent, like echoes of a forgotten song woven through the island's breath. Somewhere distant, a gull's sharp cry broke momentarily through the heavy quiet, a piercing note in the ocean's slow rhythm. Your limbs ached with the slow drain of cold and weariness. Each breath came longer, heavier, forming soft white clouds that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The shadows lengthened and curved, folding into darker shapes that teased the edges of your vision. The fragile firelight stretched thin, a wavering border against the encroaching dark, your last bastion against the cold and silence beyond. Then, from the corner of your eye, something moved again. A subtle shift, quieter than any breeze, yet deliberate in its intent. The shadow stepped forward, peeling away from the deeper blackness, like mist unfurling against the moon. It was no longer content to simply watch from afar. The shape bent and twisted, with a slow grace, edges blurring and folding like smoke slipping through your fingers. Your breath caught, heart steady yet racing beneath the weight of presence. The air thickened, dense and heavy, curling around you like ethereal fingers poised on the threshold of revelation. The forest held its breath once more, leaves frozen mid-whisper, the waves stilled in suspended pause. The watcher's gaze pressed in on you, not with menace, but with the silent weight of an ancient story waiting to unfold. And just as the fire flickered low, the shadow moved closer, dissolving the last thread of warmth and light with a slow, inevitable purpose. The island exhaled with you, the night folding tight, as if the secrets it carried were finally ready to speak. You held your breath as the last lingering tendrils of firelight flickered faintly, almost surrendering to the hungry embrace of shadow. Your hands remained steady, clutching the brittle twig as the cold threaded its way deeper, chasing the warmth from your flesh. The sand beneath your knees pressed cool and unyielding, grain by grain, marking the slow passage of time. The ocean's distant murmur softened, hushed, as if the world itself waited with bated breath. Beyond the fragile circle of your shelter, the forest seemed to pulse with a living breath. Leaves stirred in whispers, barely louder than the exhale of a frail sigh, threading through the tangled roots like threads of a forgotten song. Each gust of wind felt thickened with unseen weight, as though it carried the slow pulse of something ancient slumbering just beyond sight. Your eyes clung to the shifting dark, the place where the shadow had lingered, where forms blurred and slipped away like smoke curling in a still room. A faint scrape brushed against dry bark, a deliberate, cautious sound, and you stilled, heart folding tight in your chest, every muscle tensed, coiled against an invisible tether pulling at your nerves. The branches overhead writhed softly, crackling as rough fingers scratched skyward in a patient rhythm. Somewhere beyond the black curtain, a sharp cry split the night, a gull's fleeting lament cutting clean through the ocean's slow dirge. You drew the edges of your jacket tighter around your shoulders, the rough fabric whispering against chilled skin. The scent of salt and smoke hung thick on the breeze, sharp and tangible, prodding at memories settled beneath your ribs. Your fingers brushed absent-mindedly at the frayed collar, tracing the coarse weave like a silent prayer. The fire's breath was now a fragile shimmer, flittering shadows that danced like tentative spirits on the sand. Every breath felt deliberate, slow, the salt air heavy in your lungs, the cold seeping deeper with each measured inhale. You bent slightly, gathering a small splinter of wood, rough and jagged between your fingers. The motion was careful, reverent even, coaxing warmth back into the failing glow with gentle breaths. The fire hissed quietly, a shy bloom of amber light painting frail patterns on the gnarled bark surrounding you. The forest weighed down closer again, its murmur rising and falling like a low song you couldn't quite catch, whispers folded into the susurrus of leaves and the steady pulse of waves, weaving a tapestry of sound that blurred the line between memory and the moment. Your gaze drifted upward, tracing the skeletal branches, arcing like weathered ribs overhead. The thin stars peered through narrow gaps, pale, uncertain sentinels edged with frost. Time stretched into slow ribbons, each moment stretching wider beneath the heavy night. Your breath caught in small clouds that faded quickly, as if swallowed by the vast silence surrounding you. The fire's heartbeat matched your own, a faint flicker fading and rising, steady and fragile amid the gathering gloom. The sand beneath your knees pressed against you firmly, the tiny grains cool and sharp as they sifted unnoticed beneath your shifting weight. A subtle shift from the edge of your vision, like a ripple against water, made you freeze. A slow movement, deliberate and unhurried, threading through the thick roots and brittle leaves. The shadow from before pressed closer now, folding and unfolding with slow grace. Its edges softened and undulating, like smoke caught in a breathless dance. It was neither threat nor comfort, only inevitable presence. Your pulse ricocheted softly, pounding a quiet drum deep within your chest. The air tightened, thickening with whispered intent. Something unspoken and weighty brushed the skin of the night like a sigh. Your fingers tightened around the wood, knuckles blanching ever so slightly as the fire's glow fought a subtle retreat. The warmth curled faintly along your skin, a tender pulse against the slow encroachment of cold. You lifted your gaze again, eyes settling on the fragile silhouette etched by the fading light. The shadow was no longer distant, but moved closer with a slow inevitability, each motion tender and deliberate. It passed through the space beyond your shelter's brittle walls, folding the dark along with it. The rustle of leaves paused, the ocean's roar softened, a breath held still in the vast quiet. A soft pulse hummed at the edge of your senses, the mingled scent of salt, burnt wood, and damp earth drifting inward. The pungent tang wrapped around your throat and nose, grounding you in this fragile moment, suspended between light and dark. Your hands resumed their slow ritual, gathering and placing the smallest shards of dry wood, weaving a delicate shield of warmth and hope. The forest seemed to lean even closer, the branches tightening into a threadbare canopy that pressed down with quiet patience. Whispered syllables rose, tangled in sighs that shimmered beneath the distant lullaby of waves. Your breath slowed, each exhale a shimmering pearl, vanishing into the night's vast ocean of black. A sudden flutter traced the periphery of your vision, a hesitant pulse like breath escaping the cracked sand. The shadow shifted once more, unfolding with muted grace, as if stirred by your steady heartbeat. This presence no longer merely watched from the darkness. It carried the weight of expectation, a promise etched deep in silence. You felt the lingering warmth from the fire wrap around your skin, a delicate thread connecting you to light amid the growing dark. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound broke the silence, a breath held just beyond hearing, the soft scrape of something moving closer. The forest froze mid-whisper, the ocean stilled mid-roar, and the fragile boundary between safety and the unknown thinned to a whisper's breadth. You held your breath, every nerve taut, waiting for the next slow movement. As the shadow stepped forward, bending and dissolving into the night's uncertain veil, a final thread unraveled. The air deepened thickly around you, alive with the weight of secrets on the verge of unveiling, and in the distance, soft as a sigh, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, approaching, stirred the sand beside you. The shadow dissolved slowly into the night, as the fragile remnants of your fire flickered one last time, chasing away the thick blanket of darkness just enough to reveal the worn lines of your shelter. The cold pressed in harder now, a sharp contrast to the fleeting warmth that lingered like a whispered promise beneath your skin. Outside, the restless ocean resumed its endless song, waves rolling tirelessly against the shore, as if time itself had no meaning here. You exhaled, breath visible in the chilly air, carrying away the tension you hadn't realized had clenched around your chest. The heaviness of waiting, of being watched, was lifting, leaving space for quiet understanding. The island held its secrets, some old as the earth, some written in the fragile bones of that shattered ship. But in this moment, beneath the skeletal arms of ancient trees, the pressing weight of their stories seemed less like a burden and more like a shared breath between you and this wild place. Slowly you rose, the grains of sand slipping silently beneath your knees. The salt air was sharp but steady, a familiar companion now. As your eyes adjusted to the dim glow of pre-dawn, you caught sight of the shipwreck's silhouette, rugged and broken, yet strangely dignified against the softening horizon. Its planks, once proud and defiant, now lay surrendered to time's patient hands, a reminder that even the fiercest storms come to rest. With deliberate calm, you stepped beyond your shelter, feeling the cold earth firm beneath your feet. The scattered twigs and brittle wood you had gathered lay like a quiet testament to survival. Each small flame you coaxed to life, a defiant spark against the vast silence. The forest around you seemed to exhale softly, the branches releasing the night's hold, allowing the pale light of dawn to seep through their crooked fingers. You paused, eyes drifting upwards to the thinning stars, now fading as the sky stretched pale and endless. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the crisp scent of salt and earth, a breath of fresh beginnings after long hours in stillness. The quiet murmurs of the island's unseen dwellers, gulls, waves, the rustle of small creatures, wove a gentle symphony that filled the spaces once defined by shadows and silence. Your hands brushed over the cool sand, tracing the faint marks left by your night-long vigil. Each imprint held memory, the cautious steps, the slow dance of gathering kindling, the rhythm of a fire's breath mingling with your own. The tactile world grounded you again, a tangible link to the here and now after a night spent balancing on the edge between fear and fragile hope. As the sun's first light crept low over the horizon, it painted the sky with soft hues of amber and rose, warming the cold shadows that had clung so stubbornly to the island's soul. The transformation was slow but certain, like a sigh released from the earth itself. The air grew lighter, the oppressive watchfulness dissolving into the vast, open promise of a new day. You took a deep breath, filling your lungs with the mingled scents of sea and smoke, wood and salt, carried on the gentle breeze. The chill no longer bit harshly. It became a cool caress, waking senses dulled by night into alertness. There was a peace in this moment, an unspoken truce between wilderness and wanderer, between past stories and future steps. Moving slowly, you gathered the last of the embers, letting them trace soft spirals into the dawn's calm. Your shelter stood quiet now, a fragile cocoon woven from patience and care, holding the memory of survival without the need for words. Around you, the island breathed steady and slow, a silent witness to endings and beginnings intertwined. The shadow that had haunted the edges of your night was gone, not vanished in anger or fear, but absorbed back into the whispering earth. Its story folded into the soft rustle of leaves and the endless cadence of the sea. Its presence, once heavy and watching, had become part of the island's breath, a reminder that some mysteries do not demand answers, only respect and quiet reverence. You sank back onto the sand, the coarse grains cool beneath your hands, the familiar scent wrapping around like an old friend. A gentle exhaustion settled deeply, not just of body, but of spirit, the kind that comes when the heart finally recognizes a place to rest. Your eyes drifted closed, the last light of day brushing across your closed lids like a tender lullaby. The rhythm of the waves, the distant call of a lone gull, the quiet murmur of leaves, all blended into a soft, persistent hum that echoed deep inside. And as your breath slowed, matching the steady pulse of the island's timeless song, the world faded gently into darkness, not the heavy shadow of night, but the calm quiet that welcomes sleep, carrying you softly into rest. Here, beneath the pale sky and ancient woods, the story found its end, not with a crash, but with a sigh, not with reveal, but with the gentle closing of a day well lived, and a night finally at peace.